The cup was never full. That was the first thing every Finny child learned on Dushery. You held your cup out at dawn. You held it out again at dusk. And whatever the Galani poured into it was all you would get. 200 milliliters. Enough to survive. Never enough to live. Sala had carried cups for 62 years. Her hands knew the weight of ceramic better than they knew the weight of anything else. This morning, like every morning, she walked to the water station with 2 cups. One for herself, one for her grandchild, Letty, who was 5 years old and whose translucent skin had already begun to darken at the edges from dehydration. The line at the station stretched long. 40 Finny waited in silence. Nobody spoke in the water line. Speaking used moisture. The Galani overseer, a thick-scaled reptilian named Factor Briel, sat behind the dispensing counter and watched them with the bored patience of someone who knew he owned the only thing that mattered. Sala reached the front. Briel filled her cups to exactly the line etched on the inside. Now drop more. She thanked him because thanking him was required. Then she walked back to the shelter where Letty waited. She gave Letty her full cup and kept half of her own. She had been doing this for 3 years, since Letty's parents had died in the mining collapse. Her skin was dark and cracked across her arms and neck. The bioluminescence that once made her glow soft blue had faded to almost nothing. She was drying out from the inside, and she knew it, and she did not stop giving her water to the child. That afternoon, fire came from the sky that a streak of orange and white tore across the brown horizon and hit the salt flats 3 kilometers east of Kindaro with a sound that shook dust from every roof. The Finny stopped and stared. Briel activated his communication device and spoke rapidly in Galani trade tongue. Within an hour, he posted a notice at the water station. The crash was Galani's salvage property. No Finny was permitted within 1 kilometer of the site. Violation meant loss of water rations for 3 days. Everyone obeyed. Everyone except Sala. She did not know why she went. Perhaps it was because she had spent 62 years obeying, and her skin was cracked, and her granddaughter was always thirsty, and obedience had never once filled her cup higher. She waited until dark. She wrapped her feet in cloth to leave no tracks. She walked. The wreck was small. A cargo shuttle, human design, crumpled into the salt like a fist pushed in a flour. Pieces of metal and cable lay scattered in a wide circle. The heat had already faded. She crept closer and heard breathing that he was half buried under a section of hull plating. A human, tall, brown-skinned, with dark hair matted with blood. His left arm was bent at a bad angle. His eyes were closed, but his chest moved. Sala had never met a human. She had heard of them. Everyone in the galaxy had heard of them. The species from the death world. The ones who survived everything. But this one did not look like he was surviving. He looked like he was dying of thirst. She looked at her cup. She had saved a quarter of her evening ration. Maybe 50 milliliters. She looked at the human. She looked at the cup. She poured it into his mouth that he coughed. He swallowed. His eyes opened. They were dark brown, and for a moment they were confused, and then they focused on her face, and he saw her cracked skin and her dim glow and the empty cup in her hand. His name was Rudo-san. He said it in a rough whisper while she helped him sit up against the wreckage. He was a civil engineer from a colony called New Khartoum. He had been on a cargo freighter heading to a construction contract when something failed in the drive. The shuttle ejected. The freighter was gone. He asked where he was. She told him. He asked for water. She showed him the empty cup and explained what it meant. He was quiet for a long time. She helped him walk. It took 3 hours to reach Kindaro, moving slow, staying low, avoiding the sensor range of the Galani outpost. She brought him to her shelter and laid him on the floor. Letty stared at him with wide, glowing eyes. He stared back and tried to smile. In the morning, Sala brought him her cup. He refused it. She insisted. He refused again. He pointed at Letty and said the child needed it more. Sala felt something shift inside her chest. She had lived among the Finny her whole life, and this was normal. You gave your water to the ones who needed it. But she had never seen anyone from outside do it. Rudo sat up that evening. His arm was splinted with scrap metal and cloth. The pain was bad, but he had felt worse. He asked Sala to walk with him to the edge of the settlement. She did not. He knelt in the dirt. He picked up a handful of soil and crumbled it between his fingers. He smelled it. He looked at the rock formations on the horizon, the way the ground cracked in certain patterns, the mineral deposits visible on the surface. His expression changed. "Where does the water come from?" he asked. Sala did not understand the question. "From the Galani," she said. "It has always come from the Galani." Rudo shook his head slowly. He pressed his palm flat against the ground and held it there, as if he was listening to something beneath. "No," he said. "It comes from somewhere else first." Doran had never healed a human before. He had never even touched one. But when Sala brought the broken stranger into his clinic, which was really just a cave with shelves carved into the walls, Doran did what he always did. He worked with what he had. He set the arm using a splint made from shuttle debris. He cleaned the wounds with moisture paste, a compound of finny made from mineral salts and the tiny amount of water they could spare. Every gram of that paste cost something. 3 days of water rations to replace what he used. Doran did not tell Rudo this. Sala did. Rudo sat very still when she explained it. Then he asked Doran how many patients he treated each week. Doran said 12 to 15. Rudo asked how many of those were dehydration cases. Doran looked at him as if he had asked how many of them breathed air. "All of them," Doran said. "Every illness here starts with thirst." Rudo asked to see the water station. Sala told him it was dangerous. If Factor Breel saw a human in the settlement, he would report it immediately. The Galani had declared the crash their salvage, and that included the pilot. But Rudo insisted. So they went at dawn, when the line was longest and Breel was busiest. They stood at the back of the crowd. Rudo watched. He watched Breel fill each cup to the etched line, watched families divide those cups among 3 and 4 members, watched children whose skin was so dark with dehydration that their bioluminescence had gone completely silent. No glow, no light, just dull, cracked skin on small bodies. A mother near the front held a baby against her chest. The baby did not cry. Rudo had seen enough dehydrated children on New Cartoon to know why. Crying used water the body could not spare. The baby had learned silence before it had learned words. Rudo's hands were shaking when they walked back. Not from weakness, from something else. That evening, he asked to speak with Hadara, the settlement leader. Hadara was old, older than Sala, and his glow was the faintest in Kindaro. He listened to Rudo with the patience of someone who had heard many ideas and seen them all die. "Why do you not dig for water?" Rudo asked. Hadara explained it simply. 2 generations ago, the Galani Trade Consortium arrived on Dushri and surveyed the planet. They found the Finny living in scattered cave settlements, surviving on condensation and shallow seeps. The Galani built atmospheric moisture harvesters, massive machines that pulled water from the thin air, and declared all water resources on Dushri to be corporate property under Resource Claim 7 of the Galactic Trade Charter. The Finny had no representatives in the charter. No voice, no vote. The claim was filed and approved without a single Finny knowing it existed. After that, any independent water gathering was classified as theft of corporate resources. The punishment was collective. If one person dug a well, the entire settlement lost rations for a month. It happened once in the early years. 14 Finny died. Nobody tried again. "We learned," Hadara said. "We adapted. We survive on what they give us." "You survive," Rudo said, "but you do not live." Hadara looked at him with tired eyes. "Living is a luxury, human. We cannot afford luxuries." Rudo did not argue. He thanked Hadara and left. Sala followed him. She expected him to be defeated. She expected the same look she had seen on every Finny who had ever thought about fighting back and then realized the cost. Instead, Rudo walked to the edge of Kindaro where the settlement met the open desert. He knelt again, the same way he had the night before. He picked up soil. He pressed it between his fingers. He licked it, tasting the mineral content. Then he walked to the nearest rock outcrop and studied the layers, running his hand along the bands of color in the stone. Sala watched him in silence for nearly an hour. He moved from point to point, crouching, touching, studying. Finally, he came back to her. "These rock formations," he said. "On my world, on any world I've worked on, this kind of geology means one thing. Sandstone over limestone. mineral deposits at the surface, fracture patterns in the bedrock. He pointed at the ground beneath their feet. There is water under us. A lot of it. Sala felt her throat tighten. The Galani have been here for 2 generations. They would know. They do know, Rudo said. Their surveys would have found it. They know exactly what is under this ground. They chose not to use it because the harvesters give them control. If the water is scarce, you need them. If you need them, they own you. He said it without anger. He said it like a man reading a blueprint. This is the structure. This is the flaw. This is where it breaks. I was a water engineer, he said. On New Khartoum, my settlement ran out of water. I was not there when it happened. I was on another project 200 kilometers away. By the time I came back, 41 people had died. People I knew. People I had promised I would take care of. He looked at Sala. His eyes were dry, but something behind them was not. I will not watch that happen again. Not here. Not anywhere. Sala held her cup. It was empty again. It was always empty. She looked at this human who had crashed from the sky and who tasted dirt like it was a book he could read, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She did not have a word for it yet. But later, when the wells were flowing and the cups were full, she would learn that the human word for it was hope. They told you there is no water here, Rudo said. They lied. This ground is full of it. Sala stared at him. She did not dare to believe him, but she also could not look away. The caves beneath Kindaro had not been used in years. The Finny once lived in them, before the Galani moved them to the surface settlement where they could be monitored and counted more easily. Now the tunnels were dark and forgotten, their walls still faintly glowing with old bioluminescent markings left by generations past. Rudo chose the caves because the Galani never went underground. Breel and his kind found the tunnels unsettling. The faint glow of Finny markings on the walls made their scales itch, or so they claimed. Whatever the reason, the caves were the one place on Dushri that the consortium did not watch on the first night. Rudo went back to his crash shuttle. He moved slowly, keeping low, and reached the wreck just before midnight. The Galani had already stripped the cargo hold, but they had left the things they did not understand or value. A ground-penetrating scanner with a cracked screen but functional internals. A set of engineering tools. A filtration membrane still sealed in its case. Data pads loaded with geological survey software that he carried it all back in 3 trips, hiding everything in the deepest cave beneath the settlement. On the second night, he turned on the scanner. It took him 4 hours to calibrate it with the cracked screen, but when it finally worked, the image it produced made him sit down on the cave floor and stare. The aquifer was enormous. A vast underground lake sitting in a limestone basin 40 meters below the surface, stretching for kilometers in every direction. Millions of liters. Clean water, filtered by stone for centuries, sitting beneath the feet of people who were dying of thirst. The Galani surveys would have found this within the first week of their arrival. They had known. They had always known. Rudo saved the scan data and began to plan that he needed help. He could not dig a borehole, build a pump, and install a filtration system alone, especially not with one arm still healing. He told Sala, and Sala brought him Doran. Doran brought Pella. Pella was young, barely 20, and she was different from the other Finny in a way that was hard to define. She asked questions, not the careful, quiet questions that the Finny usually asked, designed to avoid trouble. She asked the dangerous kind. Why questions? How questions? What if questions? She had once tried to build a condensation trap from scrap metal and cave moss. Breel found it and destroyed it. Her ration was cut for 2 weeks. She built another one in secret. When Rudo showed her the scanner data, she did not cry the way Doran did. She got angry. 40 meters, she said. We have been dying 40 meters above an ocean. Not an ocean, Rudo said. An aquifer. But yes. How do we reach it? That was the question Rudo had been waiting for. Not why or what does it mean. How? He liked Pella. Immediately, he laid out the plan on the cave floor, drawing diagrams with a piece of chalk. They needed a borehole, narrow but deep, drilled through sandstone and limestone to reach the water table. They needed a hand pump, something mechanical and simple that the Finny could maintain without human technology. They needed a filtration layer at the base to keep sediment out. And they needed to do all of it quietly, underground, in 10 days or less. Pella studied the diagrams. Then she pointed at the pump design and said, "This will not work with our cave stone. Too brittle. But there is a vein of harder mineral 2 levels down. We call it dark rock. It holds shape better." Rudo looked at her. Then he handed her the chalk. "Show me." She redrew the pump housing using dark rock specifications. It was better than his design. Simpler, more efficient. Rudo nodded slowly and felt something he had not felt since New Cartoon. The feeling of working with someone who understood. They worked every night. Rudo taught them principles. Not just steps, but the reasons behind each step. He explained hydrology, how water moved through rock, why pressure mattered, how filtration worked at a molecular level. Doran listened carefully and took notes on a piece of dried hide. Pella listened, argued, asked follow-up questions, and then went ahead and tested things herself. That on the 4th night, they began drilling. Pella had found a natural weak point in the cave floor where the rock was thinnest. They used a hand drill assembled from shuttle parts and dark rock bits. It was slow, brutal work. The sound had to stay quiet. They patted the drill head with cloth to muffle the grinding. On the 5th night, Factor Breel noticed that Rudo was still alive, that the Finny worker at the mining site mentioned the human in passing, not understanding the danger. Breel sent a message to Hadara within the hour. Surrender the human or lose water rations for 1 week. 7 days. For the entire settlement, Hadara came to the caves. He was shaking. His dim glow flickered with fear. He told Rudo that he could not risk it. The settlement could not survive a week without full rations. People would die. Children would die. Rudo looked at him steadily. "Give me 10 days," he said. 10 days, and no one in Kindara will ever depend on Galani water again. You're asking me to gamble with their lives. They're already gambling with their lives, Rudo said. Every day they stand in that line. They are gambling that Breel will keep pouring. What happens when he decides to stop? Hadara had no answer for that. He left without agreeing. But he did not turn Rudo in. Sala made the decision for him. She went to every shelter in Kindaro that night and told them what was happening underground. She told them about the water, the real water, 40 meters below where their children slept. Nobody reported her. Nobody told Breel. For the first time in 2 generations, the Finny kept a secret from the Galani. On the 7th night, at just past midnight, the drill broke through. Water surged up through the bore hole with a sound like the planet exhaling. Cold, clean, ancient water that had been sitting in darkness for longer than the Finny had been on the surface. It sprayed upward and splashed across the cave ceiling, and the bioluminescent markings on the walls lit up as if the cave itself was waking. Pella caught the water in her hands and stood there, glowing brighter than she ever had, tears running down her face and mixing with the water streaming through her fingers. Doran fell to his knees and pressed his forehead to the wet ground. Rudo reached into his pack and pulled out a cup. The same ceramic cup that Sala had poured into his mouth the night he crashed. He held it under the flow and let it fill, all the way to the top, past the etched line. Over the edge, he held it up in the blue glow of the cave and watched it overflow. Letty was the first child to drink from the well. Sala brought her down into the cave at dawn, holding her hand on the narrow stone steps. And when they reached the bottom, Letty stopped and stared. Water was flowing from a pipe made of dark rock and shuttle metal into a stone basin that Pella had carved overnight. The basin was already half full. The cave walls glowed blue and white from the bioluminescent markings that had been dormant for years, now alive again from the moisture in the air. Letty looked up at Sala. "Is that real?" Sala filled a cup and handed it to her. Letty drank it in 4 swallows. Sala filled it again. Letty drank that too. Then she held out the cup for a 3rd time, and when Sala filled it, the child just held it. She held it with both hands and looked at the water inside, and her skin, which had been dark and cracked for as long as she could remember, began to soften. A faint glow appeared along her arms. The first glow she had shown in over a year. Sala took the cup from her hands and drank from it herself. A full cup. The first full cup she had allowed herself in 3 years. Word spread through Kindaro like light through crystal. By midday, every Finny in the settlement had been to the cave. They came down the steps quietly, reverently, as if they were entering a place of worship. And perhaps they were. The line formed not out of habit, but out of disbelief. They needed to see it for themselves. There was no rationing. Rudo had explained it clearly. The aquifer held more water than Kindaro could use in 500 years. The pump was simple and could be operated by hand. The filtration layer at the base kept the water clean. Drink as much as you need, he told them. Fill your cups. Fill them again to an old Finny named Goro, who had not glowed in a decade, drank 3 cups in a row and then sat against the cave wall and watched his arms light up. He did not speak. He just sat there, glowing, with water dripping from his chin, and watched his own skin come back to life. Rudo did not join the celebration. He was already working. One well was a miracle. One well was also a single point of failure. If the Galani found it and destroyed it, everything would go back to the way it was. He needed more wells. He needed a system. And he needed the Finny to be able to build and maintain that system without him. He gathered Pella, Doran, and 8 others who had shown aptitude during the construction. He spread his diagrams across the cave floor and began teaching. Not just this well, the next one, and the one after that. He taught them how to read the scanner, how to identify bore points, how to calculate water pressure and flow rates. He taught them the mathematics of pipe diameter and pump mechanics. He made them repeat it back to him until they could do it from memory. Pella absorbed it fastest. By the second day of teaching, she was correcting his calculations for local rock density. By the third day, she had designed a modular pump system that could be assembled from standardized dark rock components. It was better than anything Rudo had built. He told her so, and she looked at him as though no one had ever told her that her ideas had value. You are an engineer, he said to her. You always were. You just never had water enough to think clearly. On the surface, something was changing. The Finnies still went to the water station every morning. They still held out their cups. They still thanked Brielle, but their skin was brighter. Their movements were stronger. The children had started making sounds again, laughing and calling to each other in the shelters. Brielle noticed. He did not know what had changed, but he felt it. The line moved differently. The Finny stood straighter on the 4th day. Brielle found the well that the young Finny worker, still damp from drinking underground, passed too close to the Galani outpost. Brielle saw the moisture on his skin. He followed the trail. He found the cave entrance. He went inside, alone, his scales crawling from the bioluminescent glow, and he saw the well, the pump, the basin full of water, and the diagrams drawn on the walls. He went back to the surface and sent a message to the Galani Regional Authority. Resource theft, illegal extraction, contract violation. He requested an enforcement team. Then he walked to Hadara's shelter and told him what he had found. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply told Hadara that the enforcement team would arrive in 6 days and that when they arrived, they would destroy the well, arrest the human, and cut Kindaro's water rations by half for 1 year. Hadara came to Rudo that night. He was not shaking this time. He was something worse. He was resigned. It is over, he said. We should seal the well and beg for mercy. Perhaps they will be lenient. They will not be lenient, Rudo said. They will make an example of you. That is what people like this do. They do not punish the crime. They punish the possibility that others might try. Then what do we do? Rudo had already thought about this. He had been thinking about it since the moment the water first flowed. He knew the well would be found eventually. He knew the Galani would come. He had planned for it. He went to his crashed shuttle. The communication array was damaged, but not dead. He spent 3 hours rewiring it, soldering connections with steady hands, until the transmitter powered on. It was weak. The signal would be thin, but it would reach orbit, and from orbit, it would reach the nearest Galactic Union relay. That he sat down in the wreckage of his shuttle and recorded a message. He identified himself. He gave his credentials. He stated the location, the species, the population, the conditions. He described the resource monopoly, the rationing, the dehydration deaths, the suppressed geological data. He cited the specific articles of the Galactic Union Humanitarian Charter that the Galani were violating. Then he broadcast it on an open frequency and sat back. The message was a seed. It might take days to reach anyone who cared. The enforcement team would almost certainly arrive first. But the signal was out there now, moving through space at the speed of light, carrying the truth about Dushery to anyone listening. Rudo walked back to Kindaro. Sala was waiting at the edge of the settlement. She could see it in his face. The fight was not over. It was just beginning. What happens now, she asked. Now, Rudo said, we find out if the galaxy is listening. 6 vehicles came over the salt flats at dawn. They were black and heavy, built for intimidation more than speed, and they left deep tracks in the white crust as they approached Kindaro in a line. Behind the dark windows sat 20 armed Galani soldiers in full enforcement gear. Leading them was Director Vaughn. Vaughn was not like Briel. Briel was a bully who enjoyed the small power he held over the waterline. Vaughn was something colder. He had managed resource colonies across 4 systems for the consortium. He had shut down unauthorized settlements, relocated populations, and terminated extraction contracts that were no longer profitable. He did not think in terms of cruelty or kindness. He thought in terms of yield, compliance, and operational efficiency. The Finny were labor units. Water was product. Anything that disrupted the supply chain was a problem to be corrected. That he stepped out of the lead vehicle and surveyed Kindaro with the expression of someone inspecting a machine that had developed a fault. Briel rushed to meet him, already talking, explaining the well, the human, the stolen water. Vaughn raised one hand, and Briel went silent. Show me, Vaughn said. He went into the cave. He saw the well, the pump, the basin. He ran his claw along the dark rock pump housing and examined the filtration system. He looked at the diagrams on the walls. Then he came back to the surface and stood in the center of Kindaro. You have 1 hour, he announced. His voice carried across the settlement without effort. The unauthorized extraction point will be destroyed. The human will be surrendered to consortium custody. All water privileges will be reduced to half rations for 12 months as penalty for resource theft. Compliance is not optional. 1 hour. He said it the way someone would say that the weather would change. A fact. Inevitable. Hadara stepped forward. His body was trembling. His glow was dim. He opened his mouth to speak, to agree, to surrender the way Finny had always surrendered. But before he could form the words, Sala walked past him. She walked into the space between Hadara and Vaughn and stood there. She was old. She was small. Her skin still showed the cracks of decades of dehydration. But she held something in her hand. Her cup. Full. No, she said. Vaughn looked at her. His expression did not change. This is not a negotiation. No, Sala said again. It is not. You're right about that. This is not a negotiation. This is me telling you that I will not watch my grandchild's skin crack open because you decided that water belongs to you. Behind her, the Finny began to gather. They came from shelters and workspaces in the cave entrance, moving slowly at first, then with more purpose. They carried their cups. Every cup was full. They stood behind Sala in a half circle, their bioluminescence blazing brighter than it had in years, their skins clear and smooth, their eyes steady. Vaughn studied them. He was calculating. He had seen resistance before. It always ended the same way. Rudo stepped forward from the crowd. He did not stand in front of the Finny. He stood beside Sala, at her level, and addressed Vaughn. Director, I am Rudo Asan, civil engineer, citizen registration New Khartoum, license number 4471C. I want to discuss your legal claim. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. There is nothing to discuss. Resource Claim 7 grants the consortium exclusive rights to all water on Dushery. Resource Claim 7 grants rights to atmospheric moisture harvesting. Rudo said. I read the filing. I read it very carefully. The claim specifies atmospheric extraction technology and surface condensation collection. It does not mention subsurface aquifers. It does not mention groundwater. It does not mention geological water reserves of any kind. Vaughn was still. The water we accessed is 40 meters below the surface, stored in a limestone aquifer that predates your arrival on this planet by several million years. Your claim does not cover it. Your own survey data proves its existence, which means your legal team deliberately excluded it from the filing. Probably because claiming underground reserves requires a different class of resource license that involves environmental review and indigenous rights consultation. Rudo said all of this calmly, the way he might explain a blueprint. No anger, no drama, just facts laid out like stones in a wall. Vaughn turned to Breel. Is this accurate? Breel sputtered. He did not know. He had never read the filing. He had never needed to. The Finney had never asked. Vaughn turned back to Rudo. Legal technicalities do not change operational reality. I have the authority to secure consortium assets. The well will be destroyed. And I have broadcast a humanitarian complaint on a Galactic Union open frequency, Rudo said. My credentials, the geological data, the survey records, the living conditions of the Finney, and the specific articles of the humanitarian charter that your operation violates. That signal left this planet 5 days ago. For the first time, something moved behind Vaughn's eyes. Not fear, calculation. A Galactic Union investigation would not just review Dushery. It would review every Galani resource colony, every claim, every operation. The exposure would be catastrophic. You are bluffing, Vaughn said. I am an engineer, Rudo said. I do not bluff. I build things and I show my work. The moment stretched. 20 soldiers stood ready. 200 Finney stood with full cups. One human stood with nothing but data and the truth. Then the signal came. Vaughn's communication device crackled. A transmission from orbit. A Galactic Union patrol vessel, the GUS Fairwater, had entered the Dushery system in response to a humanitarian distress broadcast. They were requesting immediate contact with a local consortium authority and demanding an explanation. Vaughn closed his eyes. He stood there for 3 long seconds, and in those seconds, everyone watching could see the mathematics running behind his face. The cost of compliance versus the cost of exposure. The price of one well versus the price of every colony. He opened his eyes. Stand down, he said to his soldiers. Breel started to protest. Vaughn silenced him with a look that could have frozen water. This matter will be resolved through proper channels, Vaughn said. He turned and walked to his vehicle. The enforcement team followed. The black vehicles reversed across the salt flats and disappeared into the dust. Sala's hands were shaking. Her cup trembled, and water spilled over the edge, running down her fingers and dripping into the dust. She looked at Rudo. He looked back. This is not over, he said quietly. They will come back with lawyers instead of soldiers. It will take time. It will be hard. But we have water, Sala said. Rudo nodded. You have water, and they cannot take what they never claimed. Sala looked down at her cup, still full despite the shaking, and held it tighter. The Galactic Union investigation team arrived on the 9th day. 3 ships landed on the salt flats, and a mixed-species delegation stepped out into the dry air of Dushery. They were led by a Taurani mediator named Isura, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms who moved with the deliberate patience of someone who had settled disputes on 40 worlds and never once raised her voice. Isara and her team spent 6 days on Dushery. They reviewed the geological survey data that Rudo provided and compared it with the original Galani surveys filed 2 generations ago. The match was exact. The Galani had known about the aquifer from the beginning. The data was in their own files, buried in an appendix that had never been shared with the Finney or submitted to the Galactic Trade Charter Registry. They interviewed the Finney. Sala told them about the cups, about the line, about the etched mark that was never supposed to be crossed. Doran showed them his clinic records, the dehydration cases, the children who had stopped glowing, the ones who did not survive. Hadara, speaking more than he had in years, described the punishment system, how collective ration cuts had trained an entire species to stop reaching for what was beneath their feet. Pella showed them the well. She showed them the pumps she had designed, the dark rock components, the filtration system. She showed them the diagrams on the cave walls and explained each one in technical language that made Isara's engineering advisor blink in surprise. When asked who taught her, Pella pointed at Rudo. When asked to improve the design, she said, I did. Isara reviewed Resource Claim 7 in its entirety. Her legal team confirmed what Rudo had argued. The claim covered atmospheric moisture harvesting and surface condensation. It said nothing about groundwater, aquifers, or subsurface reserves. The omission was not an accident. Galani legal filings were notoriously precise. They had excluded underground water because including it would have triggered environmental protections and indigenous rights protocols that would have given the Finny a voice in the process. On the 15th day after the enforcement team's departure, Isara delivered her ruling. The underground water resources of Dushery were not and had never been the legal property of the Galani Trade Consortium. The Finny were granted full and independent rights to all subsurface water on their world. The consortium's atmospheric harvesting operations could continue, but they could no longer be the sole source of water for any Finny settlement. The rationing system was declared a violation of a humanitarian charter, Article 9, subsection 3, which prohibited the deliberate creation of resource dependency as a mechanism of control. Factor Briel was removed from his post. Director Vaughn was reassigned, pending a broader investigation into consortium practices across all their resource colonies. The ruling was broadcast on the same open frequency that Rudo had used, and within a week, 3 other species on Galani-controlled worlds had filed similar complaints. In the month that followed, Rudo worked harder than he had since New Khartoum. He and Pella built 12 more wells across Dushery, not just in Kandaro, but in settlements spread across the desert, places where Finny had been rationed and controlled for generations. Each well was built with the same modular design that Pella had created, using local dark rock, hand pumps, and limestone filtration. Each one was built by Finny hands, trained by Rudo, but working independently by the 3rd or 4th installation. Doran established a hydration recovery program. The Finny who had been dehydrated for years needed careful rehydration to avoid shock. He developed protocols, trained assistants, and kept records. His clinic, still a cave with shelves, now had enough moisture paste to treat 100 patients. He no longer had to choose who received care. Pella became something the Finny had never had before. An engineer, she took Rudo's teachings and expanded them. She designed a gravity-fed irrigation channel that brought water from the aquifer to small garden plots on the surface, where the Finny began growing food for the first time. She trained others. She argued with Rudo about pipe angles and pump efficiency, and won more often than she lost. Rudo told her she was the best student he had ever had. She told him she was not his student anymore. He laughed. It was the first time the Finny had heard him laugh. On the 32nd day, a repaired shuttle arrived from orbit. A cargo company had rerouted a ship to collect Rudo and deliver him to his original contract destination. His work on another world was waiting. He had obligations, contracts, a life that existed before Dushery that he packed quietly. He did not have much. The clothes on his back, a data pad, his engineering tools. He left the ground-penetrating scanner with Pella. He left the filtration membranes with Doran. He left the diagrams on the cave walls for anyone who wanted to learn. Sala came to him at the edge of the settlement, where the dust met the salt flats. Letty was with her. The child's skin was clear and bright, her glow steady and strong, the blue light of a healthy Finny child who had never known what it meant to be full until a month ago. Sala held out a cup. The same cup, the one she had poured into his mouth the night he fell from the sky. It was full. Rudo took it. He drank. The water was cold and clean and tasted like stone and time. He handed the cup back. "Thank you," he said, "for this cup, for that night. I would have died without it." Sala closed her hand around the cup. "You would have died, and we would have lived the way we always lived, with empty cups and dark skin and the belief that thirst was just the way things were." She paused. "You did not bring us water, Rudo. You showed us where it was. That is different. That is why it will last." He nodded. He crouched down to Letty's level. The child looked at him with bright eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of dark rock, smooth and polished, the same material the pumps were made from. "Hold on to this," he said, "and when you grow up, build something." Letty took the stone and pressed it against her chest, and her glow brightened. Rudo stood. He looked at Kindaro one last time. In the center of the settlement, where the first well had been connected to a surface outlet, Pella had built something without telling him. A stone basin, wide and open, fed by a constant flow from the pump below. Water ran over its edges and into a shallow channel that carried the overflow to the garden plots. Around the basin, arranged in a circle, were dozens of ceramic cups, all full, always full, left there for anyone who arrived thirsty, whether they were Finny, stranger, or a human falling from the sky. The shuttle lifted off. The desert spread below, red and brown and dry. But in one small place there was light. Finny light, blue and white, glowing from a settlement that was no longer dark. And in the center of that light, water flowed. They had cups. They had always had cups. But he taught them that cups were never meant to be empty.